Whenever we're looking at projectors, we're always thinking, what is the best one we should get for the money that we want to spend? Not necessarily the cheapest one or necessarily the best one, but the best value overall for the money that you spend. I think that's really important. And so today I want to test that out with these two projectors. This is the Valerion StreamMaster Plus 2. Now, you notice I caught myself because it used to be called the VisionMaster Plus 2, but they've recently rebranded it to the StreamMaster. It's the same projector. And this right here is the Anker Cosmos 4K SE. Now I've done individual reviews on these, but now I want to do some head-to-head demos of the picture quality, see which one is the best one for you. Now both of these do have Google TV with 4K Netflix, so that particular portion is not going to be any different except maybe the speed at which it operates. However, there are different inputs depending on how you want to use this. So if you want to use the Cosmos SE with some external devices, the Cosmos does have two HDMI inputs. Now one of those is an HDMI eARC, those are HDMI 2.1, does have a USB input as well as an auxiliary. If we take a look at the Valerion, we do have a couple more ports on it. It does have a fiber optic out, as well as two USB inputs and three HDMI inputs. One of those HDMI inputs, of course, being an HDMI ARC. It also has the auxiliary out, and this does allow for Ethernet plug up. So this does have a hardwired plug up for your internet if that's what you're going to be using this for. Now, the real question is, what do these look like? And is there one that is definitely better than the other one? For that, we gotta really hook this up to some measurement equipment and see what the measuring difference is and what the side-by-side difference is. All right, so I just got back from testing these. And the first thing that I wanted to test out was the sharpness. When I tested out the sharpness, you could clearly see that the Valerion was a sharper image in the sharpness test. And that became even more apparent when I actually put real content on, especially like the Google TV home screens. When I did that, the Valerion had a much sharper, easier to read text, where the Cosmos looked a little bit more blurry than the Valerion. It just wasn't as sharp or as crisp. Now I also wanted to do a 24p test. Now that's the type of test that allows me to find out if the projector is capable of playing 24 frames per second natively. Now with that in mind, both of these actually passed the 24p test, which is very rare for DLP projectors. Now, having said that, both of these do have Mimic, so if you prefer Mimic, you can put that on either one of these as well. Now, before we get into picture quality differences by showing you some side-by-side comparisons, I want to talk about the light source as well. They claim this to be around 1800 lumens. I tested this right at 1780 lumens. The Valerion maximum output, they claim around 2000 isolumens. I actually tested this a little above at 2100 isolumens. The Valerion is a brighter projector, and we will see that in some of these side-by-side comparisons, but I will say this, that is hard to capture on the camera, how much more vibrant or bright a picture is. So let's go ahead and start testing out these side by side. So I wanted to start off with some cartoons to show some of those bright, vibrant scenes off. So I showed off cars and even the wild robot. And we could definitely see a difference in both cars and a wild robot. So when we take a look at these, we're gonna see that the Valerion just looks a little bit more vibrant of an image and almost more colorful. And that's even more apparent when we watch something like the wild robot. Now you might be wondering why that is. Well, when I did the test on colors, we can take a look at the Cosmos 4K SE, tested right around 64.5% of Rec 2020 color space, where the Valerion was closer to 96% of Rec 2020, meaning that the Valerion can produce significantly more colors, and we're seeing that when we take a look at these side-by-side images. Now, a lot of this comes down to their light source. Now, both these are considered a laser projector. This does use a laser and LED hybrid light source, but because it uses that, it does reduce the amount of colors that can be reproduced. While something like the Valerion actually uses a triple laser light source, which is capable of producing up to 110% of BT 2020. And in my test results, that really did make a difference. And that also showed off in the brightness. Now, we're probably not seeing it necessarily in the side-by-side, but there was definitely a more vivid image on the Valerion versus the Cosmos 4K SE. And part of that comes down to the contrast. Now, we did test the contrast. The contrast on the Cosmos 4K SE, they claim about 400 to 1. In the mode that I tested, it was closer to 300 to 1. I think we could get 400 to 1 if we did maybe some more testing on it, but right around 300 to 1 is what I tested. The Valerion is a little bit different of an animal because they do have full on and full off contrast, which is your darkest black to your brightest white of 3,000 to 1 is what they claim. I actually tested at 3,100 to 1, but they also have a dynamic, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Their dynamic contrast ratio, they claim 10,000 to 1. It actually tested at closer to 11,500 to 1 for me, and these are from the lens. If we take a look at some of these darker scenes, we're gonna see a big difference, especially the scene from Kong versus Godzilla. But you can see even the bright, vibrant colors are better on the Valerion. They just come across better. But when we take a look at those darker scenes, we can see that the Cosmos 4K SE is starting to get washed out. They're looking more gray, and we're also not being able to see as much detail in those scenes as we can with the Valerion. Now, that's because Valerion implements what we call an EBL, which stands for Enhanced Black Level. It's a laser dimming. What that does is when a dark scene comes on, it actually dims the power of the laser so that it can darken that scene. Now, that's really good when you're watching a darker movie. Unfortunately, the Cosmos 4K SE doesn't have any of those things implemented in either the hardware or the software side. So it does suffer with that lack of contrast, especially in those darker scenes. Now, the other issue is dynamic tone mapping. With a projector, dynamic tone mapping can be a really important feature. It allows the projector to tell the source what the limitations of the projector are. And usually a projector is going to have more limitations than a television. On the Cosmos 4K SE, it actually did a really good job on the bright scenes. It handled those really well. I was really surprised, especially like scenes like this in Resident Evil. Now, the Valerion, you absolutely have to have dynamic tone mapping on. This has dynamic tone mapping built in, which makes a huge difference, especially in the details on the bright and dark scenes. Now, having said that, within the brighter scenes, really wasn't much of a difference in the details of these two projectors. But in the darker scenes, that's once again where the Valerion really shined. It was able to pick up a lot more details, and the blacks were much more closer to black. So I really appreciate that they added dynamic tone mapping. Now, last thing I want to talk about is gaming. I do love to game on a large screen, and it's one of the most fun that you can have. Now, the Cosmos 4K SE says you can do up to a 200-inch screen. I didn't test that, but probably the biggest you can do. The Plus 2, they say up to a 300-inch screen. The most I've ever put the Plus 2 on was a 150-inch screen, and it was extremely vibrant. So, you know, you can do a big screen and game on these. Having said that, there is going to be a difference in gaming performance. The Valerion Plus 2 does claim 4 milliseconds at 1080p at 240 hertz, as well as 8 milliseconds at 1080p 120. And if you're doing 4K gaming, about 15 milliseconds at 60 hertz. Now, according to Xbox, the Valerion can do 4K 120. Unfortunately, the Cosmos 4K SE is stuck at 4K 60. Now, when I gamed at 4K on the Valerion, it was amazing. Whether I turned ALLM on or gaming mode on, I never felt like it was stuttering or slow. It was just very fast and responsive. The Cosmos 4K SE, on the other hand, was not as responsive unless I added it into game mode. Now, when I put it in game mode, it reacted similarly as far as play and feel as the Valerion. But I feel like if you are going to game with the Cosmos 4K SE, you're going to want to put game mode on. There is a downside to game mode on, and that's if when you turn game mode on, it is going to disable your keystone. So you do want this to be really as centered as possible. Now, there's one last thing that I think is really important to talk about, and that's portability. What do we think about portability? As far as sound quality for portability, if you're going to go outside, both of these have speakers on both sides and they sound really good. I don't have an issue with either of them. And seeing as both of them are lasers, they're relatively quiet. But as far as actually bringing this from place to place, the Cosmos 4K SE really has the Valerion beat on that. It does have this nice handle on it, and it's not really that heavy. And if you wanted to make this even more accessible as far as portability goes, you can buy a traveling case for it. The Plus 2, on the other hand, is a little bit heavier, which makes it harder to be portable. However, it does come with its own travel case. Now, this might take up a little bit more space than something like the Cosmos 4K SE, but that's a really nice case if you are going to take this from place to place. I want to know which one you would buy and why. Go ahead and put it in the comment section down below. All right, guys, this is Toyd, and I'm out.